Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Nkem Izamama. And before we start, I want you to be thinking about this question, and I'll ask it maybe in the next minute. But it's a question that might make you a little bit uncomfortable, right? But I promise you that if you stay with me for the next 45 minutes to an hour, you're going to leave here seeing life a little bit differently. And I'm going to go very deep into the topic of why busy truly isn't a badge of honor. Some of you joined this webinar while you're maybe checking your emails, and some of you are thinking about all the thousand things that you have to do, your to-do list right now. And some of you will be watching this replay, maybe while stressing about all the other tasks that you need to accomplish and thinking, is this the right time for me to be listening to this or watching this? But then there's some of you who are here because something inside of you is like screaming, there has to be more than this endless cycle of busy, right? And you're right, there is more. And tonight, we're going to talk about it. We're going to go deep into it and really understand why we feel like busy is a badge of honor, why we should think otherwise. I'm going to talk to you about why busyness is necessarily not a good thing, and then shed some light, and we can tackle it. And I will share personal story of kind of how I approached this and where I hit my breaking point. So get ready. But before we talk about busyness, I want to talk about the expansive circle. And again, what if I told you that success isn't the ceiling, right? It's just the starting line where maybe when we get there, you realize that there's so much more. And so the expansive circle is a private community, and it's really for high achieving professionals who decide to refuse to settle for surface level success, right? We're the people who are done with checking the boxes and chasing the titles. We want deeper impact. We want intentional wealth. We want a life that feels aligned with everything that we're called to do, which is why also this topic, I think, just flows well into what we do in the expansive circle. And inside the circle, right, we don't only talk about growth, but we live it. We have curated mentorship. We have real conversations, and we really have strategic wealth building moves. We always want to rewire our mindset and then take bold action. And that, when you think about that, when you do that, that's when transformation really happens. So if you're feeling like you were made for more, right? And again, this also ties into our conversation with busyness, but you don't know where to start or who to link arms with, then this could be your tribe. The expansive circle, what we do in our community, we're not just building wealth. We're not just thinking about life on the outside of the boxes, but we're building really expansive lives. So please come join us, take your seat, and we would love to have you. And so for right now, we are having a founding member opportunity. And if you the link should be put on the, I think one of our team members just put up the link, and the code is founder. And if you use that right, you can join our circle. We have monthly implementation sessions. We have weekly Monday momentum on topics that just challenge you on how to start your week, how to think big. If you're thinking about entrepreneurship, if you're thinking about wealth, this is the place to come, and this is the place that you want to be a part of. So think about success partnership networks, resource library, videos on just how to learn everything that we think about that we're doing in terms of how we want to grow and how we want to live larger, more expansive lives. It's all available in the circle. So I welcome you. If you're excited, please click on the link, join. We'd love to have you there. Okay, so back to what we're talking about, right? So you can't look around, right? But I want you to just kind of think about yourself and think about some of the questions that I've posed on the screen, right? This is not just a small problem. So think that if you are, if some of these things are things that you're struggling with, right? If you ever said, I'm too busy, or I'm swamped, or you're checking your emails during family dinners, like if that is you, those are some of the things that you've struggled with, right? I want you to just like lift your hands up, or just think about it in your heart, or just say, you know what, this is me. And this is not a small problem that we deal with, right? This is almost, it feels like an epidemic. We don't like to use that word, but it feels like an epidemic among high achievers. And if you've used the term, I'm so busy, and I used it today, right? When someone asks you, how are you? Have you ever felt that weird sense of pride when you said it? You're like, oh yes, I'm really, really busy. But here's what I want you to know about, if any of these phrases kind of tugged at your heart, or you thought, man, I relate to one of them, right? You didn't climb into, the high places in your career just to feel empty, to always feel like I'm always busy. You didn't work this hard to feel almost disconnected with your own life because you're so busy that it almost feels like you're on the outside looking in, right? Something has got to change. And I think maybe that's why you're here tonight. And that something isn't your calendar. It's not your time management system, right? It's not like you need to manage your time better. It's not another productivity hack. And don't worry, I'm not giving one today. But the problem is deeper than that. And I think the solution is a little bit more radical than you think. And the first step is accepting the fact that maybe this is a problem. I want you to think about something, right? When was the last time that you asked yourself what you wanted, like what you really wanted? If you're in the medical field, it's not what your patients wanted, it's not what your clients wanted, it's not what your boss expects, it's not what your family requires of you, right? And it's definitely not what society demands, but what you really actually truly want. And if you cannot answer that question immediately, right? It's not because you're indecisive or you can't make a decision. And it's not because you're too busy, taking care of everyone else's needs. It's because you've forgotten that yours also matters, right? Because you've been so busy doing all those other things. And there's a difference between, kind of thinking about being selfish or, I'm thinking about myself. It's not about that. It's about recognizing that you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? You have to fill yourself first, and from that place of fullness, then you pour into others. And a lot of us, on a day-to-day basis, right, we are running on fumes. And that's because we are pretending that our tank is full, but it's really empty. So you have to pause and ask yourself, is my tank really full? Or am I running from a place of empty and fumes and then trying to pour that into someone else? So I told you I'd share kind of where all of this came from. And I picked this, I think, because it resonated so much with the path that I'm on right now and where I'm going. So I want to share a moment that really changed everything for me. But first, I really want to paint a picture of who I was before that moment, right? From the outside, it seemed that I had figured it out, right? I was at the peak of my career in healthcare, and I was doing well in the ER. I was loved. I was respected by my colleagues. I was understanding and fully embracing financial freedom and what financial success looked like. It felt like I had almost like the whole package on the outside, right? I was that person that other people looked at and they said, oh, yeah, she's got it all together. And I remember one time I was giving a speech, and it was about, like career paths, right? At that intersection between medicine and like life outside of medicine. And the talk was 10 out of 10. It was a great speech. And I stood there and I was so excited. And I was excited because I was like, oh, I delivered this. And I was accepting all the applauses and the like high fives. But inside, I remember thinking I felt kind of empty, right? I felt like, yes, they were clapping, but like on the inside, it felt kind of hollow. And that's because nobody saw that I was running on fumes, that I was exhausted all the time, that I was maybe a little bit irritable with my family, and that maybe I couldn't even remember the last time that I laughed because I was so focused on checking all these boxes, right? And I was successful by every means, but I don't know, I felt somewhat miserable. And I had become, this like super high functioning, well respected, but almost like a completely depleted human. And it's kind of sad for me to say that out loud now, but that's really how I was feeling. And the worst part was like maybe a part of me, a small part of me thought that that was what success was supposed to look like, right? That everybody who had achieved that level, that they were always tired because that was the price of achievement. And I thought that if I wasn't overwhelmed all the time, then maybe I wasn't important enough. Now looking back, that sounds really dumb, but that's how I felt down then. And if I felt that way, right, there are probably some of you that have felt that way, that you felt like your exhaustion, like how tired you are, is the proof of your value. And if you felt that way, I want you to pause, and I want you to remember what that feeling felt like, because it's not okay. And I had been feeling empty, right? And even that instance helped me realize that something was wrong, but that wasn't even the breaking point, right? There was one random weeknight. A lot of things happen when I'm in the car, but nothing dramatic happened, right? But that's maybe what made it so powerful, because I was sitting in my car after a 10-hour shift. And like I said, a lot of my life-changing things happen in the car, but I was sitting in the car, and I after that 10-hour shift, even though I had felt like I had made a difference, like I felt like I didn't accomplish anything. Like I was supposed to be proud. I had seen patients, I had saved lives. Even that day I had attended some meetings, I responded to emails, and in again, every sense of the word, I was productive. But when I was sitting in that parking lot that night, I felt completely hollow. And that's when this question hit me, and it hit me like a freight train. And I thought, if I died tomorrow, right, would I be really proud of how I spent today? Like, this my last day. Like, would I be thrilled? Did I make a difference? Was I full? And that's the question, maybe a little bit morbid, but that's what I was thinking about that night in the car. And as you would imagine, right, the answer was a little bit devastating, because no, the answer is no. It's a clear no. I wouldn't have been proud. I would have been proud of what I had built, but not of how I had lived, right? At that point, I I could say it and quite honestly say that I was successful, but I was pretty miserable. I was accomplished, but I also felt kind of empty. And so this is the question that really broke me open, because then I took it a step further, and I was like, well, okay, so I asked it, would I be proud of how I spent today? But then I took it a step further, and I said, what about yesterday? And what about last week? And what about last month, right? And the honest answer was that I could not remember the last day that I would have truly been proud of how I spent it. And it wasn't because I wasn't achieving big things, because I was, but I wasn't actually living, right? It felt like I was just performing. And I was almost performing success. I was performing dedication. I was performing being fine, but I wasn't living life. I was just kind of a manager of my own life. And that was where I understood the big difference, right? And that night, I think I realized that I wasn't just busy, but I was almost busy avoiding the life that I actually wanted to live if I asked myself the hard question. And I was so afraid of like disappointing other people. But the truth is, like, I was disappointing the one person that mattered the most, which was myself. And as I tell you the story, right, I want you to just think, like, how many of you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And if you ask yourself that same question, would the answer be the same as mine? Would the answer be a resounding no? And if it is, then maybe you should pause and ask yourself, who am I living for? What am I living for? Um, am I just busy just to be busy? And so that night in the parking lot, I made a decision. And I think it was a decision that maybe changed my life. And I will say this, right? This is a constant practice. And this is something that I'm constantly working on, because I don't ever think that you can perfect this, right? Because sometimes we just get carried away in the mundane and in the everyday task. So this is something that you constantly have to remind yourself, that really busy is not a badge of honor. And I don't want to be busy just to be busy. But that night, I decided that I was going to pay attention to just one week. and just 1 week of my life, right? I wasn't going to pretend. I was just going to live that life that week, and I was just going to pay attention, but like really pay attention, not to try to self-correct, right? Because I was paying attention, not to judge, and not even to try to fix it, but I just really wanted to notice it. And I encourage you guys, right? I encourage you, as you're listening to this, whether you're rewatching it, to do the same thing, right? Just take a week, maybe the next week, from today, Thursday, to next Thursday, and see, just take inventory on what your life looks like, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And what I discovered, what I found out, made me even sadder, right? Because I was living this fast paced world. I was almost living like fast forward, like really, really fast, because I was always thinking about the next thing, right? The next meeting, the next deadline, the next big goal, the next big achievement, the next big milestone, the next big thing that I needed to accomplish. But I wasn't physically present, right? I was there, like I was physically there, but I wasn't mentally there, right? It almost felt like I was mentally absent. It almost felt like my life was happening around me while I was just busy planning for someday, right? Someday when I achieve that goal, someday when I get to that milestone. And that's what I was doing. And that's what I realized, that was one of the best things I did, which was take inventory. And I realized that maybe I had been waiting to be less busy, to enjoy time with my friends and my family and my community. I was waiting for more money to take that trip, right? I was waiting to finish that big project before I could pursue that dream. And at that point, right, I was waiting to get through that season before I started living, before I even started thinking about building a business. But this is something that nobody tells you, and I really want to tell you, is that when people talk about someday, right, that someday, it never comes, right? Because when you get there to that someday, there's always another someday to get to. So you really never achieve that someday that you're thinking about. And it almost felt like I was living like my real life, but I was trying to get caught up every single time. And I realized that getting caught up was not possible, right? And if the goal really was to get caught up, what was I doing? Was I being intentional? But that week of paying attention to everything that I was doing, right? It taught me something. Um, it taught me that I wasn't busy because I had so much to do, right? I was busy because I was so afraid to stop to ask myself the real question, which is, what did I actually want to do with my life, right? I was 100% doing some of the wrong things. Not everything I was doing was wrong, but some of the things I was doing was not what I was supposed to be doing. And, I share this with you because I want to give you the freedom to ask yourself this same question, right? When you take inventory, what am I afraid of? What am I running away from? Why am I so busy? What am I trying to accomplish? Busyness almost felt like my drug of choice. It almost felt like it was numbing me to ask the uncomfortable question, right? I didn't want to ask it. And those questions were stuff like, am I happy? Um, is what I'm doing fulfilling? Is this who I want to be? Is this the path I'm supposed to be on? Am I just living or surviving? And again, I tell you this because I want you to ask yourself those same questions, right? Wisdom sometimes is learning from other people's mistakes. And so you don't have to do the same thing. You don't have to make the same mistakes. And so maybe you get ahead of this and you ask yourself that question. And I realized very quickly that I didn't have to think about the truly important things in my life because I was just missing it. And if you sat down and you thought about busyness, right, would you feel the same way? Are there deeper questions that you need to ask? And maybe they're not the same as my questions, but they're questions that you need to ask about your life. Are you running away from something? Are you living up to your full potential? Is this the path you're supposed to be on? All of those questions are questions that you get to ask yourself now because you're doing the work in the beginning. And I'll say this, right? over the years, I've talked to, and over the recent years, I've talked to a lot of high achievers. And I've almost identified this thing called like the triple trap is what we call it, but it's not like random busyness, right? It's like this sophisticated, really cool busyness because it feels like you're actually doing something. But again, you're still just doing the thing to mask what exactly you really want to do. And so you have this like performance productivity, right? You're not just busy, but like you're like busy, and you're busy performing busy tasks. You have long hours, your calendar's packed, the idea that you might even sleep when you're dead, that mentality, because you're like, you really are busy, and that becomes part of your identity. You might even think that, like, if I'm not overwhelmed, something is wrong, right? And if I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not important, I'm not needed. And you might even wear this like badge of exhaustion. You wear it with honor, and you compete with maybe some people at work who you're like, well, are they busier than me? Like, are they, like, even sitting still is a problem. But these people, I think, maybe have confused like motion, like the fact that they're just moving, and they've confused that with progress. And they've almost confused like activity, just doing with achievement. And so that's something that a lot of people struggle with. But I've come to realize that, like, being busy, it doesn't necessarily make you important. And this is like a hard truth to swallow. But what makes you important is when you're intentional, when you care, when what you do matters and other people see that. That's being intentional, and that's what really matters. So that is kind of the idea of like being busy just to be busy. And then there's another group, and these are the, like, that savior complex, right? It's maybe even, I think some of us in healthcare, we fall into this trap, or some of us in service or leadership, right? You have been trained that like the needs of others come first, and you take this to like the 10th degree always. And your calendar sometimes will reflect what everyone else's priorities, their schedules. And yourself, but you almost feel guilty for saying no, right? And you believe that like every other person's needs are higher than yours, and those things need to be valued. Even Seth, with this savior complex, you might even confuse your worth with like your availability. So if you are available, you're not worthy. And so you keep wanting to fill your schedule. But again, in healthcare, we know this, right? You can't save everyone. And if you try to do that, you will fall apart. It will destroy you. And so that's something to think about, right? That idea of like the savior complex, and you just filling your schedule with other people's needs. Again, you miss out on what's important. And the third one is this idea of like the success guilt, right? And this one I think is the most like insidious one, because it's like it creeps up, and you don't necessarily maybe know it or see it, but you feel it, right? It's this idea that, like, I have a good life, I have a great life, and I shouldn't complain. So because of that, right, you stay busy, and you stay really busy to avoid the hard question, like, is this the life that I actually want to live? And I will say that I probably struggled with this one more than the other ones, right? Because you feel guilty for wanting more. When you already have so much, like, you're like, okay, these are all the things I already have. Anybody who's looking on from the outside in will be like, man, you have it all together, you've got it going on. But is this exactly what you really want, right? And then you start thinking like, I have to be grateful, right? And that idea of gratitude, which I think is not the right type of gratitude, is just to accept whatever, right? Whatever life is currently throwing your way, you accept it, because like you should be grateful for the life that you have. But I would kind of challenge you, right? Because there's nothing wrong with wanting more joy, wanting more meaning, wanting more alignment. And that's not being ungrateful with what you have, right? That's human. Because then when you again start asking yourself those hard questions, right, you will be able to get to the answer that you need. This is something that I want you to kind of like take home with you tonight, right? If you're already home, maybe just like put it somewhere safe. But the reality is that nobody ever wants to say it out loud, but you cannot create this expansive life or this big life from a contracted state, of a state of like where you lack gratitude because you're not doing the things that you're supposed to. You're unhappy because you think that this is the life I'm supposed to lead, when you know that maybe you're called to do more, to be more, to impact, to change lives, whatever that looks like for you. You can't decide and say, I want to live an expansive life when you know that it's maybe still eating you up on the inside. And when we think about like this busy trap, right? I told you guys we're going to go deep. I meant it. It's not about time management, but it's really about this kind of belief system that we've been programmed to, like long before we got into our careers. Like, and it's this idea that like you have to be productive every single time, and you need this busy behavior, and it's what's driving productivity. And it's not really true that your worth does not equal your productivity, right? And somewhere along the way, we learned this, that like to be valuable as a human being, it's directly tied to our output. So like we don't value ourselves because we're not doing this, we're not doing A, B, C, D. Like if you're not producing, then you're not worthy. And that's not true, right? That is 100%, that's 100% not true. Actually, that's completely untrue. And if you keep resting on that, you will feel worthless because you cannot produce every single minute, every single day. And so you have to start aligning who you are with something more than just like, oh, I'm choosing to be productive. And then in this like kind of world that we live in, right, you also have this idea that like rest is equals like laziness. Like if I rest, it means like I'm lazy. And you know, like we're taught you're either productive or you're lazy. And you can clearly see the difference when you look at two different people, and there's no in between, right? And so you don't understand, or you don't learn the idea of like intentional rest, or like we talked about on Monday, right? Creating margin and creating white space to be able to think, to be able to create. Like all of that actually makes you more productive. And that's something that people don't understand, because if you don't create that space, then you are stifling your growth significantly, whether it's at work, even whether it's at home, right? And so that's another thing that like our career and the community teaches us. Another thing that we're taught is like people pleasing sometimes is like equal to love. And we have learned that like love is this thing that is conditional based on our performance. And again, it's not true. So like if you disappoint people, they'll leave. Or so then you have to say yes to everything, which just isn't accurate, right? When you start thinking, and when you start putting yourself first, and when you start really going after your goals, right? It's okay to say no. It's okay that those people need to not become parts of your life. But that is something that you have to think and you have to understand. And these beliefs, right? These are things that like our careers have taught us, how society has taught us. But these beliefs, if they don't serve you, which they shouldn't, right? Then you have to start letting go of them. And maybe they might have served you when you were building, you know, when you were trying to go up in your career. But if they're not serving you right now, then you have to let go of them. And so the question that you have to start thinking is like, it's not how can I manage my time better, but it's how can I reprogram some of these beliefs that have been so ingrained in us as a society, as a nation. How can we like rewire those beliefs? Because if you don't, then they could almost ruin your life, right? And at the end of the day, I always say this, right? You have only one life to live, and this life is pretty fragile. So every day you have to think about, what are you doing to grow yourself? What are you doing to grow the people around you? You know, how are you really impacting lives? That's what's important. And so if you need to rewire some of these beliefs, then that's what you need to do. Okay. We're going to go a little bit deeper into like what this idea of busyness is costing you, right? And I think this is where many of us care about the most. Like, what is it? How is it affecting us? How is it hurting us? And when you're constantly busy, right, it almost feels like you become reactive instead of strategic. And I'll tell you guys, I struggled with this a lot, right? Because when you are so busy and when you come from that place of reactivity instead of strategy, right? All you're doing is putting out fires. It's like when you could get to work, like everybody's relying on you and you're just putting out fires, but you're not being strategic, right? You're not trying to figure out how should I even prevent some of these things from happening? You are just responding to people's agendas instead of setting your own. You're making decisions like from a place of urgency instead of clarity, right? That's the difference. And when you really tackle this idea that like we're just busy, 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 and we're just doing work, right? If you actually come to pause and you think about it, you will re-strategize how you do things, because it's very important, right? When you are busy, right, you're now available all the time, because that's the mentality. But you go from taking away excellence to just being available all the time, right? You're spread so thin that you cannot do deep work, and deep work is where change really happens, right? You become accessible to literally everyone, which again means that you're not excellent for the people that you need to be excellent for. And one of them is yourself. One of them is growing in like your area of expertise. Your best ideas sometimes will come maybe in the shower or maybe in the car, because those are the only times that you're alone. Those are the only times that your brain has space to think. And I told you, I shared my story of in the car, right? Because I was just too busy. And this is how you need to start thinking about, right? And this is kind of that busy professional. But when you think about it from a place of, I have to be intentional, right? You now start creating space for a lot of strategic thinking. You learn to protect your time. You have time for deep work. You can see the big picture. You can even anticipate a problem before it happens. And I'll share something really personal with you guys, right? Before, I used to create a to-do list, and my to-do list would have like 10, 15 things that every day I'm like, I'm going to crank this out one by one by one by one. But I realized that I had to stop that. And I realized that for me to move forward, right, for me to accomplish like my big goals, I started realizing that it was maybe 3 or 4 big things in the day that I needed to accomplish to make sure that I was moving towards a path of excellence, right? I wasn't just available all the time for 10,000 things to get done, but I was really spending time on the things that would make me excellent, that would make me stand out. That was how I started to learn to master deep work, which is like time that's really spent to think, to create, to focus, to strategize, because that's where most of the output comes for professional life, for personal life, for career, right? Those things that are important, it happens in deep work, but you have to intentionally create the time for it. And this is what I noticed, right? These intentional people, they actually get more work done than just the people who are busy just to be busy, right? Than those people who want to achieve so much more. But they do it without the drama. They have more time that's created for deep work, for strategic work, and that's how they're able to grow. And this is a little annoying, because you're like, why are they doing better? But they are very intentional and very purposeful about where their time is spent, what they use their time to do, the people that are around them, the people that are impacting them, and at the end of the day, it's really enhancing their lives. So, and this is something that I kind of want to talk about, right? This is the hidden cost that is actually costing. So we talked about how it's costing your professional life. I wanted to make it a little bit more personal, talk about how it's costing your personal life and even maybe your spiritual life, right? Because even though that the professional costs are deep, right? These are a little bit deeper. And when you think about it from a personal standpoint, right? Sometimes when you're so busy, your relationships are on autopilot, right? You are physically present, but like you're not there. You're mentally absent, you're emotionally gone. And your friends and your family, your community, they just get leftover energy. They don't get the best of the best. And you love them, but you're not like fully with them, right? That's what it looks like when you're also busy, when you take busy from, from the office and then you bring it home. Your heart almost feels like an afterthought, right? Because you're just scheduling everything. Your health is also on the back burner because you're not making time to exercise. You're not making time to eat well. You're not making time to like even for mental health, you're not making time for that. It just almost feels like you're, again, on autopilot, you're a machine. And another thing that I notice is that even like when you dream, right? Your dreams again are like someday, because you're so busy in the present moment, right? So like, that book that you want to start writing someday, that trip you want to take someday, that business that you want to start someday, that hobby, that you want to take on, I'll do it someday. That marathon that you want to run, I'll try again next year because this year didn't work out, right? That is all the things that it's kind of costing you when you pause and you ask yourself these hard questions. But also from a spiritual standpoint, right? I think maybe this is some of the deepest cost, and it's something that we don't talk about, right? You don't have space when you're just going. You don't have space to hear your own voice, and you don't even have space to hear the voice of God, right? And you're so busy, like you're just responding to everyone's needs all the time, and you've lost touch with some of your own desires, your own dreams, your own calling. This is why I think this is so important that we need to talk about it, and we need to pause, and we need to kind of understand why this is so important, right? And when you are so busy, and this is the one that maybe hurts my heart the most, is that you are disconnected with your purpose. You maybe know that you're called to do something bigger, but you can't hear it because of like the noisiness of your busy life. And then you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of all of this, right? If you are living someone else's definition of success, if you're achieving goals that look good on paper, but they don't feel good in your soul. So for some people, right, the busyness will affect them more from a professional standpoint. And for others, it might be more from a personal or maybe a spiritual standpoint. And I want you to think about this for a moment, right? Again, it goes back to asking yourself those hard questions. What dreams are you not pursuing because you're just busy in the mundane? What relationships are suffering because you're not creating space and margin and boundaries, right? Or even I would take it maybe a step further and ask yourself, what version of yourself are you not becoming because you're so busy and you're so exhausted and you can't grow? And I think if you were 100% honest with yourself and ask yourself that hard question, you might decide that today will be a wake-up call that you just don't want to be busy anymore, because you're busy avoiding this life that you actually want to live. And that's why I want you to pause, think, and just kind of like let your mind and let your brain percolate. And this is something that I know, if you're listening to this, I don't know if it was by accident, right? At least I don't think so. Something maybe inside of you is like, this isn't it. This can't be all this life is about, right? There has to be more. And if you're asking yourself that question, if you're thinking about it, right, that voice, it's not your inner critic. It's not your worst, how it's not your worst version of yourself that is just like criticizing you. I want you to spin that and think about it. Maybe it's inner wisdom that's asking you, that's like telling you, hey, listen to me, pay attention. And that's what I want you to pause and think about, right? And I want you to think about, like, what if you stopped trying to optimize or make this busy life the life that you want to continue to lead? And maybe you start asking yourself if this is like the life you really want, right? And this is a hard question. And by all means, some people here are listening will be very content. But if you aren't, right, I would encourage you to pause and just ask yourself that question, right? What if the problem is that you're not managing your time well? What if that's not the right question? What if the problem is that, like, you're managing the wrong life or the wrong priorities? And if you stopped just quick enough to ask yourself that question, right, the reality might sink in that, maybe your calendar is fine or your calendar is not broken. That's not the problem. It's your relationship with your worth that is. And if you pause enough to ask yourself that question, right, you will then ask yourself, like, and then you might realize or tell yourself that, like, your value doesn't come from output. Like, you're not valued based on the results that you put out, right? And when you start to think about that, it doesn't make you selfish, and it doesn't mean that like you're behind. It just means that, okay, today is a day that I get to ask myself those questions, and then I get to answer it, and I get to pivot, right? I will now get to change and strategize and figure out, what is it that I want? Who do I want to be? Where do I want my cup to be full? What is going to fill that cup? And then from there, how can I pour into others? That is what I want you to start thinking about. Okay, so I want to just quickly kind of just touch through this, right? I just want you to think about kind of the idea behind the busy, right? And this is where, if you paused and if you really understood it, right, it would help you get clarity on how to start breaking the cycle of busyness. And I want to be very honest with you about something, right? Your I'm going to also say this in the best way that I can, but your busyness is not about having too much to do, right? Sometimes it's about what you're avoiding to stay busy. And this, I think, is something that a lot of people need to understand. You could be just busy, 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 but the question is, what are you avoiding? And for some people, right, you might be avoiding the fear of just being ordinary, because as long as you're busy, then you're going to feel important and nobody's going to know that you're just simple and you're ordinary. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But this is a fear, right? And then some people they are so busy and they want to avoid, asking themselves the uncomfortable questions about life. Again, for me, it was, am I fulfilled? Am I happy? Is this who I want to be? Am I living, or am I just surviving? Right? Those are some of the questions that if you paused from this busy cycle, maybe you would get to ask yourself, or maybe you're just busy because you don't want to ask yourself those questions. But sometimes you're so busy because you don't want to choose the path, right? You are avoiding maybe making a big decision. That's another reason why people are just busy all the time. Or you might avoid, difficult emotions, and so you're busy. And that those emotions could look like fear, or even disappointment, right? Or grief, uh, or whatever it is, right? It's easy to be busy because then you don't have to face those difficult emotions, and you could just keep going. And then also, I think the one that is the hardest, and maybe I relate a little bit more to, is like you're so busy because you are afraid to look at maybe who you are right now versus who you want to be, or versus who you know that you're capable of being. And I can laugh or smile when I talk about this, not because this conversation is not hard, but it's because I see, when you stand and you look in, right, you can see the fallacy of some of the ways that you think and some of the ways that you do the things that you do. And so it's sad, that I could be so busy, because I don't want to face the person that I am, because the person that I am today is probably not who I want to be. And today you get to ask yourself those questions, right? Those hard questions. And I think that it's very important. And I've learned that like busyness is this really sophisticated way of procrastinating on the life that you want. So if that's the case, then you have to love yourself enough to stop it, to ask yourself the harder questions, and to help yourself, give yourself the room and the opportunity to grow. Again, right? I don't have like a study guide to give you. What I want to give you is permission, and I want to give you permission because maybe nobody else has, and so I really want you to listen to this, right? What if you gave yourself the permission to not do the things that is expected of you, right? Like leave this networking event early or this webinar and go do something else. Like that could be you giving yourself permission to do that, right? You don't have to say yes to everything, right? You could say, I'll check my priorities and I'll get back to you, because then you're picking you and you're picking what's important to you, right? What if you gave yourself permission to spend an hour walking outside and really thinking and really growing, right? And what if you even gave yourself permission to turn off your notifications, turn off your phone, and just focus on deep work, and focus on the work that will actually help move you forward, right? Those are the things that are very important that you have to think about. But sometimes you just need permission to know that it is okay. It is okay to do the things that matter the most to you. It's that simple. It's not that simple, but it really is that simple. And so this is kind of what I want you, as we start kind of wrapping up, I want you to think about this shift, right? And this shift is like, I want to start going from I'm too busy or I'm so busy to I want to be intentional. I don't want that to be like the quick answer, the quick response that comes is that I'm too busy, right? I want you to kind of reposition that thought and then think, well, how can I be more intentional? How can I be more intentional about being the author of my own life? Because that is the most important thing. And when you do that, I think you become more conscious about how you spend your energy, how you spend your time, how you make decisions, which is the most important thing. So think about going from a quick response to how are you? I'm so busy, I'm exhausted. And I did that today, right? My assistant asked how my night was, and I was like, I'm so exhausted. And for me, when I was getting ready to talk, I thought, man, I'm still falling into this trap. But again, I told you, right, we're not going for perfection. We're just trying to make changes every day. And I think that's the most important thing. And here's this uncomfortable reality, right? The hardest part of all of this is not managing your time. I think maybe the hardest part might be disappointing the people who have gotten used to your unlimited availability. So like, because you're always available, because you're always thinking about other people, right? You might hurt some people and you might disappoint some people. And it's a better word. And I think that that's okay. Because if that means that you are moving towards the path of becoming a better version of yourself, then I say, and I think it's worth it, right? So a lot of the times, right, you give everyone 24 hours of your day, 7 days a week, no boundaries. But what if you stop doing that, right? What if you stop saying yes every single time and start thinking about, I have to say no because I have to create white space. I have to create margins. And I will tell you this, right? People will respect those boundaries when you start laying them down. No matter, they might not like it in the beginning, but as they see the work and as they see the progress, they're going to start respecting it. Because at the end of the day, the right people, they want you to be happy. They want you to be healthy. They want you to be whole. And I think that that's more important than saying yes. So I want to paint a picture of what an expansive life looks like and how you can contrast it to being busy and to being busy all the time, right? An expansive life is not having more and more and more, because we still have the same 24 hours in a day. And it's not about being less successful because like I'm not doing the things because I'm not busy. I think that you have to understand it, that when you start making the right choice in how you spend your time, in how you spend your energy, in the people that you surround yourself with, I think that's where you start seeing the difference. And that's really what an expansive life looks like, right? You go after the things that make you whole. You go after, working with the people that push you forward, right? You surround yourself with people whose their dreams don't scare you, right? Because their dreams are so big, and they're like, no, I'm not afraid because like my dreams are bigger. And then they push you to go and to do that thing, right? So that's kind of the difference when you start thinking like, what is expansive living versus just living a busy life? How do you start raising your standards so that you deserve, the attention, the time, the space to grow? That's how you have to start thinking. So I want to give you, as we kind of come to a close, I want to give you 3 questions that will completely kind of change how you make decisions about your time, your energy. And if you can, I want you to write these down or think about them or take a screenshot. But the first question I want you to ask is, before you say yes to anything, this is very important. Before you say yes to anything, you're not going to not every decision that you make is a yes, right? before you say yes to anything, I want you to ask yourself, and I mean yes to anything. So think a meeting, a commitment with a friend, a project, going out on Friday night, a phone call, whatever it is, an email. You have to first ask, does it align with who I'm becoming, with the person that I'm becoming from a personal standpoint, from a professional standpoint? Ask yourself that question. And what that does is that question kind of forces you to have a clear path on the direction that you're going to take. Does it align with the person that I am becoming? And then the next question you ask is, will this thing drain me or will it energize me? Because your energy is the most important and your most precious resource, because you will notice that some people will work so hard at something and it takes up so much of their time, but like they are so energized because they're doing the thing that really energizes them and it doesn't drain them. So that's how you have to start thinking. Number one, does it align with who I'm becoming? Number two, will it energize me or will it drain me? And number three, am I saying yes from a place of fear or a place of love? This one is kind of a deep question, right? Because we all suffer from FOMO, the fear of missing out. So make sure that like when you answer that question or when you say yes, right? Make sure it's not because you're afraid of missing out or you're afraid of disappointing someone. All of those things don't matter, again, because you are becoming a better version of yourself. So that's something that I just want you to take away. Like I said, take a screenshot. I left the picture on for a while, but make sure you just kind of think through that. So, again, I told you that I wasn't going to end this with like another to-do list or tell you. I did ask you 3 questions, but I think those, you have a lot of to-do lists. Like you can easily create one in your head and you were probably doing it, but you have enough of those, right? And you don't need another framework that you're not going to use. I said it before, and all I want to do is I want to give you permission. And the permission is I want you to question every single thing that you've been told about success, what success looks like. And I want to give you permission to think differently, right? To think at least differently from how you currently think. And I want to give you permission to stop, to just like stop performing and to start living, right? That's what I want to give you permission to do. And so as we wrap up and as you think about it, right, I think that that's the only action step that I want you to take. I want you to be able to have permission to ask questions, to think differently, and to also pay attention to that voice inside of you. Maybe the one that even got you here today, but the one that is telling you that maybe this is important. It only takes one thing to strike a chord to like really like light the fire and like to like fan the flames for you to go and be a better version of yourself and like start really doing the work and start showing up. And this, this process, right? When you start thinking about how I want to let go of this idea of not being busy, this isn't, you have to think, well, this isn't working anymore. There has to be more than this, right? Those are the things that are constantly on your mind. I'm tired of feeling empty. I want to live again. And those are some of the questions that you need to start asking yourself. And so if you hear that voice, right, that voice is not your enemy. That voice is your friend. That's your inner wisdom that's telling you, pay attention, start doing this. And it could look different, right? It doesn't have to be you go full throttle tomorrow, but it could start with asking yourself those questions or thinking through kind of a timeline of what the last week looked like, or even look forward the next week and really figure out where are the areas that I need to pull back? Where are the things that I don't need to be doing anymore, that are not serving me, that are not in alignment with who I am and where I want to go? So I believe this is maybe our last slide or second to last slide, but I do know we're coming to the end. And I want you to understand that this life that you are thinking about, right? This life that you know that you are capable of leading, the one that you want to live, it just requires one thing. And it's one simple thing. It is, you have to have the courage, you have to be bold, and you have to be able to disappoint this version of yourself that person that you think that you're supposed to be, you have to be like 100% able to disappoint her, for me, and to become the version of yourself that you know that you actually want to be, that you're capable of doing. That is all that it takes for you to take that first step and for you to move forward. It is the courage to be able to disappoint this version of you, because this version of you has gotten you this far. And if you are not satisfied, if you are not happy with it, then it's time for you to disappoint her, and to become the person that you know that you're capable of, right? You have to be willing to disappoint that version, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, that version has served you, it's gotten you here. But if you want to go 100%, 1,000%, to become the version of yourself, to align with your big goals and your vision and the values that you have for yourself, then you have to be willing to disappoint her. And not just her, right? Or not just him, but all the other people that are okay with this version of you. You have to be able to, you have to be willing to disappoint them and to say, I'm changing, I'm moving, I'm growing, I'm not holding on to busyness anymore because it is not serving me. If anything that I've shared with you tonight has resonated with you, if you've kind of felt that inner voice saying, yes, this is what I needed to hear, then I think that you're ready to kind of take the next step, and you're ready to start really doing an audit of where you are, where you want to be, where you want to grow, right? Those questions that I asked you to ask yourself, it's very important, because you have to be 100% honest with yourself. You know, what am I avoiding by staying busy? What would my life look like if I prioritized my growth and my energy instead of other people's expectations? That is a change that you need to make. That is the deeper work that you need to embark upon, right? That one thing, that one small change, which is like that, stop saying, I'm busy, I'm too busy. And, you know, even on our phone, and one of our away messages is busy, right? Let's take that and help shift your identity, because those stories that we tell ourselves, that becomes the life that we live. So if you're ready to do that deep work, which is now asking yourself the hard questions, answering it, and implementing it, that is how you can now get away from this busyness trap and realize that it's not a badge of honor. It really is something that we struggle with and that we don't want to anymore. So I talked to you about the community before, and I think one of our team members will put the link. But really, if you are not going to succeed by yourself, and what I mean by that, that it's very difficult for you to get on this path alone, but you can do it easier in community. You can do it easier by linking arms together, and to start making that decision today, right? And this expansive life, it doesn't come again from doing more. I don't want you to think that you're coming in here and all you're just going to do is more. It really comes from becoming more of who you have always wanted to be. And one of the things is now asking yourself this question and asking, why am I so busy? What am I running away from? What am I hiding? What difficult emotions do I not want to be? Do I not want to uncover, right? Those are the questions that you have to start asking. And the question is not whether this is the right time, right? The question is, do you have time for this not to be the right time? And again, we're talking about busyness and how important our time is, and what we want to do and how we want to forge forward. So the life that you're awaiting is like, it's waiting for you, right? The life that you want is really waiting for you. And the question that I want to ask you is, are you ready to claim it? So I want to say thank you. I know that there are questions in the chat. There are a few questions, so I'm going to run to the questions. But before that, I just wanted to tell you thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to kind of answer, the courage to question, why am I so busy? What do I need to do? And to even think about, like, is there a different way that you want to do this? So I just want to say thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to jump to the questions because I see the blue screen. Is success really money? Okay, this is a good question. No, not at all. And I think that there's more to success than just money. there's so much more to living a full aligned life that money doesn't play a part in. And so when you stop thinking about success and money, I think that you might even make more money, right? But when you start thinking more about value creation, I think that that's how you're going to start growing. But more than anything, right, is figuring out like the life that you want to live, the life that you want to lead. What are you doing to align that, the person that you are today and how you want to grow? I think that's way more important than um, just success and equating success to just money. And I'll say one more thing. It's different for different people, right? Success for others might be coming home at 5 o'clock to spend time with your kids. Success could look like, after doing all the things that you're supposed to do, maybe travel the world. That could be success. So success looks like building something that really impacts lives on a larger scale. Again, that necessarily isn't money. So I don't think that success really is just money. Do you believe it's possible to build wealth without burnout? If so, what systems or streams have helped you do that? Okay, so this one's a little hard, and it's very possible, right? Sometimes in the beginning, when you're building something, that's going to impact lives or that's going to change lives, right? You do it from a place of love, and so you pour everything into building that thing, right? And so sometimes that could come with burnout, and that's maybe just physical burnout, exhaustion. But if you put the right systems in place to be able to curb that, knowing that you can build wealth and you can follow your dreams and you can grow, I think you can do that without burning out. So you asked what systems or streams have helped you do that. So let me answer that, right? In terms of building wealth, it started with a foundation. And my first foundation, I will say, was my medical career, right? I used that and I leveraged that. So I worked hard in the hospital, and then I leveraged that to build other systems to really help me grow wealth that were kind of working for me. So like one of the things that I did was real estate investing, right? And so then I funneled some of the income and some of the wealth that I was building in medicine and put that into other streams of income. So think about, like, for one thing that I did is real estate. So that's how you can think about streams. And then in terms of systems, if you're talking about like business, right? When you're thinking about building wealth, and maybe through entrepreneurship and through building a business, you 100% have to have systems in place, because you will not grow if you don't have systems. If you show me your systems, I'll show you how far that you're going to grow in your business. And so that means maybe from the beginning, one could be kind of automating little things that you do over and over, but also it could be starting to the best of your ability, building a team to then help you streamline some of the things that you do so that you can do it well. That's what growth could look like in terms of building wealth inside of a business. But streams of income, one of the things is real estate for me. Such a great session of reflection. Honestly, thanks so much for sharing. You're very welcome, and enjoy the webinar. Oh, yeah, I'm happy to hear that. Those are great questions. If there are no other questions, someone else is typing. I'll wait for the question if there's a question. Webinar was eye-opening to me. Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for the time, for spending the hour with me. We went a little over, but I hope that this was insightful. If you figure this out, right, or if you make a decision to start implementing this, I would love to hear it. Because like I said, some days it's very easy for us to just stay in the trap and to be doing the same thing over. But if you're very conscientious about it, then you can decide every day to make the decision to help you move forward in the right direction. So I'd love to hear wins, successes, and stories of how you conquered this. Maybe we can learn or exchange ideas. But okay, on that note, everyone, have a wonderful evening. And yeah, have a great evening.